So that's round 2 of the first triple header done and dusted, and we're leaving Austria and heading to Hungary. But before we do that, Alex and I are back to rate the driver performance of the Styrian Grand Prix. The Austrian Styrian Grand Prix, something along those lines. I think everybody, including Formula One, was getting confused as to which Grand Prix it was. But we're back. We're here to rate the drivers, and we're going to include the fan vote as well this time so that you guys can't get too upset with our rankings. So before we get going, here's a little reminder of the methodology. So let's go through the scoring system. So all drivers are going to be rated for their performance through the whole weekend, with the focus mainly being on qualifying in the race. But it's important to note that this is not just race performance, it's entire weekend performance. So a number 10, if a driver's rated number 10, that means exceptional performance, maximising the result, and either through overturning a major obstacle or dominance over rivals, excelling in all areas. Number 9. If a driver gets a number 9, it means outstanding performance, but without quite reaching the heights required for a maximum score. Number 8. Very good performance with no major errors and a final result that, relative to circumstances, reflected the car's pace. 7. Good performance, perhaps one that's a little inconsistent in some aspects, or without extracting the maximum from a car, but still yields a reasonable result. 6. Solid performance, but without getting the most out of the car or nailing it when it really mattered. 5. Patchy performance, not necessarily off the pace, but failing to string together the weekend well and coming away short of a good result. 4. Disappointing performance, failing to get close to the maximum of the car and making mistakes at key moments. 3. Poor performance, either through struggling to get the most out of the car or through some massive error falling short. 2. Very poor performance, with mediocre pace and mistakes adding up to a wasted weekend. 1. Terrible, a performance with no redeeming features. Okay, so Alex, we're going to kick-start with the team that really needed a good news story, and it just did not come. And that, of course, is Ferrari, who had pretty much the worst race that they could have possibly imagined going into this second round in Austria.
Yes, it wasn't good by any stretch, was it, Jess? I mean, qualifying was bad with Leclerc exiting in Q2 and then getting a penalty, and then he commits the cardinal sin in the race. He takes his teammate out. As we'll come on to, he earns a lower score than Vettel did last week, because at least when Vettel spun and hit another car, it was from another team. But yeah, disaster for Ferrari. It's going to be a really hard season, and I suspect a really hard next season as well.
Vettel has been given a 5 and Leclerc has been given a 3, which is the lowest rating so far. Obviously, we've only had 2 races, but still the lowest rating so far.
So Vettel gets a higher rating because he's blameless in the collision and he qualified ahead. So ultimately, yeah, he's ahead on 2 counts. He did have a bad start, so that's why his score can't really get any higher. And he was pretty lacklustre in Q3, like qualifying 10th. You know, he got beaten by both Renaults and AlphaTauri. You know, the McLarens he should have been in a fight with, really, when you think about the pace of the car. So yeah, so that's why Vettel's on a 5. And Leclerc has to be a 3. He can't score higher than Vettel did last week because the collision was catastrophic, taking out his teammate. It was a rash move. I don't really know what he was thinking. Yeah, he held his hand up and he apologised immediately, and that's great. I really do commend him for that. And from what I know from when I covered him in F2, that's exactly the kind of guy that he is. But yeah, it was just such a bad error. And it was always going to happen. He was going into a gap that was always going to close, takes out his teammate, and actually damages Kevin Magnussen's car on the outside as well.
Okay, so the driver next up the grid who also didn't finish the race, and it was quite an unfortunate one because he had a really, really good qualifying, looked really much stronger than he was last week, because last week for me, he was a driver that just didn't really do much, didn't really set me alight or think that he had a particularly good performance. But his qualifying was brilliant. He did really, really well in the wet. But then obviously Renault then had that cooling issue and he had to retire, and he also had his teammate telling him to get out of the way, which is always really quite amusing. But so you've given him an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, chiefly from the qualifying performance, because it was just so good. He beat a Red Bull in a Renault. Renault really has no business being P5 on the grid at the moment. Sorry, Fernando, if you're watching, which I hope you are. Now, yeah, okay, yeah, he did look slower in the race. I don't know whether the cooling problem was affecting his pace. Obviously, that did do for Daniel Ricciardo a week ago. But yeah, I mean, it was problematic. I think had the race gone on, he might well have ended up with a lower score because he held up his teammate. He kind of looked like he sort of screwed over his teammate's conscious strategy. But he still bounced back nicely. It was a good performance, and he outperformed the car, and that's why he got a high score. It was just unfortunate we couldn't see what he could have done with it in the end.
So next up the road, we had the two Williams. And, I feel a bit sorry for Latifi because he is paired with somebody that everybody is talking about as the next Mercedes driver. And he did, obviously, Russell's Saturday was really, really strong. Getting into Q2, it was amazing that Williams were actually quite upset they didn't make it into Q3, which, that's such a good news story for Williams after last year, but didn't quite make it. But you've given George Russell an 8, and Nicholas Latifi a 7, which is quite strong. But so I wanted to ask why you've given Latifi such a, I guess, strongish score.
As I say, Jess, great weekend for Williams because of Russell's qualifying result. But yeah, Latifi's score is strong because I'm a bit like you. I do feel a bit sorry for him having to go up against George Russell because he's very highly rated. He's on the Mercedes books. And by all accounts, he's quite an intense teammate to have. I think in the junior formulas, especially at ART and GP3 and F2, I think he demanded a lot of the team and maybe that rubs off on his teammates as well. And you can sort of see that in the Drive to Survive documentary on Netflix when he's in a debrief. He's really, he's honest in his feedback, let's put it that way. But yeah, the other reason why I feel sorry for Latifi, particularly this weekend, and why he scores highly, is because he's very good in qualifying. He was unlucky, I think, with the red flag caused by Giovinazzi's Alfa Romeo. So he didn't get the chance to do a final. He hadn't quite improved on what would have been his penultimate lap, but he still had one more attempt to get in there when the red flags came out. But he was showing strongly and out-qualified Giovinazzi as well. Obviously, he crashed, which we'll get onto later, affects his own score. So yes, that's the reason why Latifi he scored so highly. And also, didn't really do a lot wrong in the race. He finished pretty much where we would expect him to finish. And the reason why, he's definitely scored lower than Russell is because Russell went off the track and came back past him. Now coming on to Russell, so good in qualifying. Again, he was on track to earn a really high score had the race panned out as we would expect from him, but it was a poor error, and he owned it. He put his hands up, but yeah, he sort of got a snap of oversteer as he came around the outside of Magnussen and skated into the gravel. So yeah. But nevertheless, that qualifying performance, that Williams, which again finished about where it should have done, that's why he deserves an 8.
I think I'd probably agree with you. Right, we've got the first of the AlphaTauris now, and Gasly, who again had a really strong showing in qualifying, just kind of dropped off in the race. His teammate finished higher than him, even though he started higher up the grid, much higher up the grid. So again, what happened with Gasly, and why have you given him an 8 out of 10?
So the reason why Gasly gets an 8, and I suspect, Jess, that maybe you and I will disagree on this score, and the viewers as well. But the reason why is because he just did so well in qualifying, getting that AlphaTauri ahead of the Ferrari into Q3, astonishing in the wet, brilliance from Gasly. I looked up and saw a replay that shows Ricciardo clips the back of the AlphaTauri at the first corner, and then when it was explained afterwards, Gasly felt that had actually damaged the car. Now the team hadn't diagnosed the problem. Maybe it was just sort of we're going to put a bit of an arm around him and say this is why his pace wasn't so good, but we have to take him at his words, and hopefully they'll explain exactly what the issue was. He just couldn't make the hards work as well as his teammate Daniel Kvyat did, and that's ultimately what did for him. But the qualifying performance was so strong, that's why I boosted him up.
Giovinazzi's next up the finishing order. Again, not a very strong showing from Giovinazzi. You've given him a 6, which I think is probably fair. I would potentially even give him a 5.
Yeah, I think a 5 would also have been fair, Jess. But the reason why he does get a 6 is because he actually drove very well at the start of the race. He made a good start. He avoids nicely the Ferrari drama. But yeah, the reason why he's down in a 6 is, as you say, that Q1 crash ultimately costs Raikkonen the chance to improve as well. And that's as we said last week with Valtteri Bottas. That's not really very good. So yeah, poor mark for Giovinazzi.
Up next, we've got another team that hasn't really been having a great moment, and maybe that is the Ferrari Association. But Haas just seems to have an absolute nightmare, just a no-show. They're just kind of nowhere.
They both score 8. Grosjean obviously had more problems to overcome, which is why his mark is sort of boosted slightly higher. And Magnussen, I think he finished ahead, obviously, so that's why he ends up there. It was interesting because they both end up finishing ahead of a faster car in Giovinazzi. But what was really interesting was that Haas swapped both drivers twice, and at neither point did the two drivers drive into each other, which obviously they could not do last season. So commendable for that effort, I would say.
Another 8 out of 10 is Kimi Raikkonen. Again, I guess a pretty solid result for him.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he was screwed over rather by the red flag in Q1, but I think he qualified basically where the car would have been anyway. He's going to struggle to get out of Q1 at the moment. And the reason why he does well is because he rises up the order in the race, gets ahead of the Haas as he should do because it's a faster car. But at the start, again, he is another victim of the Ferrari incident. His car, he's sort of trapped on the inside, whereas Giovinazzi can go round the melee, as it were. But he has to slow right down. His car actually goes into anti-stall several times. If you watch the onboard, he sort of like can't get it going. Now he is saved by the safety car. Obviously, that allows him to catch back up, but he still has to get back past everyone, which he does, which is why he scores an 8.
We're moving on to my first shock result that you've given me, Alex. You've given Daniel Kvyat a 9 out of 10, which is really, really strong. But why?
I was really impressed by Kvyat. I think he qualified about where you'd expect the AlphaTauri to be in Q2. But the reason why he does so well is, the Ferraris were gone in their ridiculous incident. Obviously, Ocon as well. That just means there was an opportunity for someone to score a point, and he took it. I think if you look at the midfield, you can sort of split it into McLaren, Ferrari, Renault, Racing Point, well in front of them, obviously. And then there's another split where you've got AlphaTauri, Haas, and Williams. And for one of those teams to score a point, I think you've really got to reward that. And it was a great drive from Kvyat. He was on a quite a different strategy to most people. He started on the mediums, went on to the hards, which he was able to make work. He had to soak up a lot of pressure, particularly from Giovinazzi, who'd make the best of his good start before falling back. And then at the end, he was able to run clear. So I just thought he was pretty good, and I think that's rewarded. And he wasn't shown on TV much, but I think he deserves credit for his race.
Next up, we've got the guy who started P3. Is this a reason why he maybe doesn't score as highly? Because Carlos Sainz has got an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, it is that sort of second half of the race that costs him a 9, really, Jess. Because he was so good in qualifying. That lap to be third on merit in the wet, only behind Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, is truly impressive. What a lap from Carlos Sainz in qualifying. But he was running okay in the first stint. Ricciardo was about just over a second behind him when they came in for the pit stops. So you don't know where he would have ended up in the mix, but you like to think he'd be there or thereabouts had he been able to keep his tyres alive. He played the team game brilliantly. He showed Renault how to do it. And by letting Norris through, that allowed Norris to go on to get P5, whereas if he hadn't, McLaren might have ended up with 8th and 9th as opposed to 5th and 9th. So, good on Carlos for doing that. And good on McLaren for just being like, right, this is happening. Yeah,
I know. It just goes to show that if you follow team orders, you can sometimes get a better result. And I know people at home really don't like team orders, but I guess it's part of the strategy play, right? You want to bring home as many points as you can. And if your drivers are in the wrong order and that's scuppering your chances, then you're going to get them out, wanting to get them out of the way, which leads us on to Daniel Ricciardo, who was pretty desperate to get his teammate out of the way for a lot of that first stint. And you've given him a 7 out of 10, which I probably would agree with.
Yeah, it was a weird one with Ricciardo because the Ocon battle just ruined his strategy. There was just sort of, you just think, what were Renault thinking? That the order should have come there. And again, to reference Fernando Alonso again, he's gonna be screaming this time next year if the same thing happens. It would have been interesting to see what he could have done had the strategy been allowed to play out. But the reason why he has to get a 7 was because he slipped back in stint 2, but he qualified behind Gasly in a much slower car, and he also hit him at turn 1. Which I know these things do happen in the tight scrap at the start, but it was it's a non-contact sport. Shouldn't really be doing that.
Okay, now we've got the curious incident of the racing points, which obviously at the moment we're still waiting to hear whether they will even be allowed to keep their points and positions from this race, because obviously there's now a full FIA investigation as to whether their brake ducts are a carbon copy of last year's Mercedes, which is not allowed. So that's currently under investigation. But what is going on with those racing points? Between the two of them, I think I agree in the order you've put them. So Lance Stroll, you've given a 6. Sergio Perez, you've given a 7. I mean, actually, no. That drag race to the finish and him still holding on, even though he was limping to the line, was just fab. How can you give him a 7?
Yeah, I totally agree, Jess. It was a brilliant drive from Sergio Perez. I mean, it was just all undone with the incident in Albon. He says it was his one opportunity to get by, but he had more laps to do it. And the car was so so fast. He was so much quicker than Albon. And actually, when I went into the numbers for my Autosport.com and Autosport magazine race report, he was faster than Valtteri Bottas over the second stint, and they stopped at a similar time. So he was really, really, really on it. The reason why he gets 7, qualified P17 on the grid, and then he hit another car and cost himself a position. Actually, 2 positions, because he should have finished 4th. And he had the pace, it seems, to be in the hunt for the podium. So Perez, yeah, I've said it in my explanation for Autosport.com and for the magazine. He was looking like he was going to get an 8 or a 9. He was overturning it. His race performance was great. And then he ruined it all. I was really looking forward to getting to talking about the Racing Point drivers because the car is so good. We've finally seen it. It looked good in practice for the Austrian Grand Prix. It looked even better on Friday. And then they both messed up in the wet.
All right, fair enough. I think you're going to have a lot of angry people in the comments right now because of that rating. But we want to know what you think, so keep on commenting. If you don't agree with Alex's ranking of Perez, head over to autosport.com and there's a little widget underneath each of the drivers that you can rescore the drivers that you don't agree with Alex on. So there you go. Head over to autosport.com for that. Next up, we've got the driver that people are now calling Last Lap Lando, because where does that last lap pace come from? How does he keep managing to do it? And why have you only given him a 9 out of 10?
Well, there's a very, very clear and very good and very strict reason why he cannot score a perfect score, which is because he ignored yellow flags in FP1 and got a grid penalty. And that's pretty damning. Like it's there for a safety reason. You don't know what's happening with the marshals and the cars stopped on track, so you cannot do that. And as I said, it's a whole weekend score. Obviously, he's weighted significantly more towards qualifying in the race, but that's just a sloppy error from Lando, which he shouldn't have made, particularly coming on the back of his great podium finish. But yeah, brilliant from Lando in the race. The key here was managing his soft tyres all the way up until lap 39, which meant he could sort of unleash his pace later on in the race compared to his rivals. As I said, let by brilliantly by Sainz, went on another charge, again putting some great moves. But yeah, it's just he comes across Perez, who is so slow, he only has a split second to jink by him. He does him at the last corner, he gets 5th place, and for me he gets 9.
Again, somebody who can't seem to get a break is Mr. Alex Albon, who you've given a 6 out of 10. I think I'd be inclined to agree, purely just based on the fact that he just could not keep up at all, could he? He was so far off the pace. So yeah, is that the main reason for a 6 out of 10?
It is. Obviously, Max Verstappen was so far ahead, he was able to make another pit stop to try and go for fastest lap at the end, which is really damning for Alex Albon. I do feel sorry for him. I think he's brilliant. He's shown very, very well in his sort of season and a bit in Formula One, and could have won the race last week. Obviously, I think circumstances aided him with that, but if you look at our rules definition, he cannot score higher than a 6 because this was not a good race performance. And going into the numbers, if you take their lap times from the safety car restart to when Verstappen pits, Albon shipped a second a lap. It's like 0.99. It's close to 1 second. But that's really alarming, frankly. And Verstappen dismissed this in the press conference when I asked him after the race. He said it wasn't like Hungary 2019 where Pierre Gasly not being in the lead fight cost him the win against Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton, but it did look very similar. Without having a second car in play, Red Bull were completely outfoxed. There was nothing they could do. By that point, Bottas was always going to get by because Mercedes had a pace advantage and they had the strategy advantage. Now, Red Bull did what they could. We'll come on to Verstappen in a minute anyway. But it's Albon's absence that harms his team. And then there's qualifying where he gets beaten by Ocon, where he gets beaten by Sainz. And he said, he braked a bit late and hit a river. Well, maybe
it's your job to avoid those rivers,
just,
isn't it?
I don't want to beat up on him too much, but in a Red Bull, you can't be that far behind your teammate. You just can't.
So for a P3, you've given him a 9 out of 10, and I think it was a typical Max Verstappen performance, wasn't it? It was just he got absolutely everything he could out of that car. Had a brilliant wheel-to-wheel moment with Bottas. I mean, the fact that he doesn't give up and he just comes back even though he's on the back foot is just typical Max Verstappen, and I think it just makes him such an exciting driver to watch. But ultimately did have to yield, came in P3, bit of a disappointment I think for himself and the team, but to be honest, I'm not sure he could have done much more. So what is that the reason why he doesn't get full points?
So the reason why he doesn't get full points is the Q3 spin, because that is an error. Okay, yeah, Hamilton was untouchable. It was really hard in the wet. I know there were some weird comments on Twitter saying that he was, because of a story I wrote, that he was blaming Vettel, giving him understeer when Vettel pitted. He wasn't. He just explained it, but it did contribute to the off. That was an incidental aside there. But yeah, so yeah, there was an error there, and it could potentially have cost him. Like, you can't afford those slips when you don't know what's going to happen. Okay, Hamilton was another level in qualifying, but yeah, Jess, I mean, he really did all he could. Apart from that, he qualified second, as we'll come on to, with Valtteri Bottas behind him. And Red Bull were in a bind. Once there was no Albon, and as Verstappen acknowledged, actually really maybe no strategy call was going to get Red Bull to beat Mercedes in that race.
I think I would imagine a lot of people at home are okay with a 9 for Max Verstappen. But so the guy that beat him to P2, Valtteri Bottas, 8 out of 10. And in comparison to his teammate, just showed the difference in calibre, really, when it comes to wet weather driving, which for me is a massive indicator of a great driver. And I think we were spoilt in qualifying. We really got to see a lot of the drivers come to life. But Bottas just wasn't one of them. But did make up for it in the race and got P2, which is basically the minimum that his team would have expected him to do. So is that why he doesn't maybe get a 9?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Jess. I mean, it's interesting. The glaze brake thing is there's a minor mystery surrounding it, because Toto Wolff was asked about this. It was like, well, if that was a problem, why do you not change it? You're allowed to under the rules ahead of the race. And Toto Wolff's point was, well, it was only really, a wet weather issue, as you say, Jess, so it would have gone away in the race. But yeah, just a question mark as to why Mercedes didn't actually change that part. But the reason why he's marked down on Hamilton does include qualifying, because Bottas himself said after the race, despite the brake problem, I still underperformed. He was very honest. I really appreciate that. And I think we all should, when drivers are honest in their feedback. So yes, that's why he was just like, didn't get the maximum out of it in qualifying, even with the issue. And then actually, when you think about it, he took a long time to beat Max Verstappen in what was a faster car. He blamed sort of traffic when he came out after his stop. And I was just a bit like, well, yeah, I take your point, Valtteri, because it's quite a short lap, lots of drivers, but your Mercedes is on another level compared to all those cars you're lapping.
Fair analysis, I think. So let's move on to his teammate, who you've given a perfect score to. Now, is this predominantly due to his absolute dominance in qualifying?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually both. I would say qualifying and the race. He was sublime. The qualifying lap is just incredible. On pole by 1.2 seconds over Max Verstappen, who's brilliant in the wet. Hamilton was just phenomenal. And then when it came to the race, he never looked like he was going to lose it. Once he aced the start, Verstappen's under a bit of pressure from Sainz. There's the difference. Controls the restart. There's a tiny little slip at turn 3 at one point, but he doesn't go off the track, unlike Romain Grosjean, who'd done it a few laps before. And he just never looked like losing. This was Lewis Hamilton hitting back. I think, as I said in my race report for Autosport magazine, where last week there were errors, this week there was nothing but excellence, and that's why he deserves a perfect score.
Yeah, I think it was just one of those typical easy day at the office type. He just was on a cruise, really, wasn't he? He was on his own. It was just that level of dominance. And that, as you said, the qualifying lap for me was just out of this world. But obviously, this is exactly what Lewis Hamilton had to do, because he's in a deficit to his teammate in the Driver Championship. Finishing 4th last weekend has put him massively on the back foot. So is it enough? He's kind of got to hope that Bottas implodes at some point and has an equally bad weekend as he had last weekend. But at this point in time, Bottas is doing everything that he needs to do. So how that's going to play out, I'm not sure. But I think that's a really good summary of everything that happened. No doubt you guys have your own opinions on the driver rankings. So make sure, as I said before, that you head over to autosport.com and give us your own ones, as well as leaving comments below this video as to whether you agree or disagree. If you've got any feedback on this show, we're open to it. So make sure you're leaving that below as well. Try not to be personal or mean about the way Alex and I look. That's kind of off guards, but if you don't like the format, or if you love the format, let us know how that plays out. And make sure you subscribe, because we're going to be giving you loads more in-depth analysis of the race weekends as the weeks go on. But thanks, Alex, for giving us your rankings, even though we don't always see eye to eye. I think it opens up good debate, and we'll see you after Hungary.